being a mom, you become a pretty good detective, so you find things out, that they don't think you'll find out. So I knew pretty early when Riley started using harder drugs, and I talked to him about it, and tried to always, um, I don't want to say coax, but influence him to make better choices and to seek treatment, because I knew there was, nothing, he was powerless to it, just as powerless as I was.
What are some of the things that have gone through your head, and what, you and your husband and your family really felt?
Well, with addiction, it's not just the person who's using, um, disease. It's a family disease, and it was. It's really hard, because unless you're going through it or somebody's been through it, nobody really understands, what parents or siblings go through. Um, you become codependent upon your addicted loved ones. So depending on how Riley was doing, that depended on how I was doing as well. If Riley was doing well, I was doing well. If Riley wasn't doing well, I wasn't doing well. And then it was a downward, spiral from there, because then, the other children, his siblings, my husband, just put tension, between us. The kids felt it, mom's sad, or, they're arguing again about Riley, and, things like that. It's a whirlwind of emotions, from sadness, you feel hopeless, the anxiety, the fear, angry, I know when my anger would get so strong, I would feel like, oh, I despise Riley at times, like he doesn't realize what he's putting me or his siblings through. But it was short lived, and I never despised Riley. I despised the drug, and, what it did to Riley. And I remember that day, because, Riley was gone, had disappeared, gone for days. And we would do this where we check his messenger just to see if, when he was last active. And he never went very long being inactive. So I would know he's up, he hasn't slept, he's using. And he was waiting on a check to come in the mail. So I knew he'd be making an appearance. And so my husband and I were keeping an eye out for him. And we said, well, we need to go to the grocery store. We'll go together. And I said, watch, we'll leave and he'll show up. Well, we locked the door and didn't think, if he was there. We were worried about things being stolen and whatnot, because that's what had happened. And um, we got home, and yep, Riley's shoes were outside in the garage, and we noticed him right away. And I'm like, how did he get in the door? I still don't know how he got in the door, but we came inside, and my husband immediately went down to check on him in his room. And I stayed upstairs, and my husband just screamed my name, and screamed Riley's name, and then screamed my name, and I was just frozen. I'm a nurse, but at that very moment, I was frozen. I couldn't even move. I couldn't take a step. I was too afraid that he was going to tell me Riley was dead. And so I just screamed, what? And then it seemed like forever, but it was moments, a few seconds later. He said, oh, thank God he's moving. So, but Riley had really OD'd, and fell in the bathroom and hit his head. And the way he had fell, his arm had went behind him, and it was purple from, no circulation. So that's what my husband had seen. And just nursed him all night long and watched him, begged him to go to the hospital. He wouldn't go. He was over the age of 18. I couldn't force him to go. I've done that. I've called paramedics to my house and to check on him, and they said once he refused, they can't make him go. So nursed him and just watched him.
How do you feel, that people may think of you? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Even I don't feel people purposely, treat me different, and they may not even do it at all, but you feel a sense of kind of like a stigma about it, because, oh, her son is an addict or uses drugs, or, the meth head, or, those type of things. And so it's always in the back of your mind. I have some very close friends that I share my, story and Riley's story with. I've reached out to support groups. There's online support groups, mothers of addicts, and so um, people that are close to me, some of the people that were closest to me and my family are no longer here, but I still talk to them and still reach out to them. But I don't think people purposely treat me different, but it's still in the back of my mind, that they think, oh, she must be a bad parent, or I wonder if that meant she is an addict, or, things of that nature.
Yeah. Going to Riley, when he was in the hospital, can you, in your own words, kind of tell me, from that day that you showed up and found him, can you just tell me the roller coaster and, kind of the details of what you guys really went through?
Riley's friend had been messaging me and telling me he wasn't feeling well. And I had done the tough love, I'm not going to enable type thing. I don't want to show him I care, because if he knows any, ounce of emotion is there, I don't want him to, kind of use that against me and, wiggle his way back into me enabling him, because that's a part too of this addiction is enabling, whether or not a parent feels like they are enabling or they aren't enabling. You really truly are an enabler. And I would say to his friend, yeah, he's probably just dope sick, he's coming off of drugs, I think he'll be fine, but just let me know. And he would tell me, no, he's still not doing well, he went to the hospital, they released him. And I thought, well, if the hospital released him, nothing must be wrong. And I said, let me know, tomorrow if he's feeling better. Tomorrow came, and he told me he wasn't feeling better, he wasn't getting up, and I had asked about, if he's using a restroom and, kind of personal things, and he said, when he does go to the bathroom, it's really dark, he's not eating, he's not drinking much, and I knew I probably had to take it upon myself to go check on him. I almost didn't. I almost did not go that day, but I drove into Goshen, and I took one look at Riley, and I knew as soon as I saw him that he needed to get to the emergency room. The doctor listened and said he has a significant murmur, which I've known Riley's never had. I knew right then what we were faced with. And then the blood work came back, and they knew it was growing something. They just didn't know what. And Riley's allergic to many antibiotics, so they just started putting anything and everything that they could on board until they had the cultures back to know what was growing in his blood. But in the meantime, his heart wasn't working well, and it was under a lot of stress, and his color was terrible. He was gray. His fingers were blue. He had evidence pretty much throughout his body that it was shutting down, and I didn't leave his sight. I was scared to death. But I recall asking him if he knew how sick he was. And he said to me, I feel how sick I am. So I knew he was sick. And we just had to let the antibiotics try to work to get the infection under control as much as they could. And they weren't working. And he was still having really high fevers. And they told me, there may be a possibility that surgery can't wait. And if he goes into surgery, it's 50-50. He could make it, he couldn't. But they were going to hold out as long as they could to get as much medicine in him to get the sepsis under control. And he woke up one night to use the urinal, and I got up to help him. And when I mean wake up, he slept like 23 hours a day. He didn't wake up but just to use the restroom. He didn't eat, nothing like that, And when he sat up, he said, I can't see, everything's blurry. And I immediately thought he was having, a stroke. And so I was asking him to squeeze my hands and stick out his tongue, and him calling the nurse. And the nurse came in, and by that time, his vision was completely black in his right eye. And they rushed him down for a CT, and it came back that there was nothing going on in the brain. And that next morning took him to the eye doctor, and literally from the time that the infection had broke off his heart valve and traveled through his bloodstream and blocked the blood flow behind the eye, there's like 20 minutes from the time that happens to the point that they can save it. And so he's blind in his right eye. It just can't be saved. And I thought, well, dear God, just let this be, it. if that's all it is, then, he can make this without having a stroke and, or death, then, it'll be okay. So bargaining, with God and things like that, of course I was doing. And they told me that night when the nurse called the doctor to tell him about his eye, when they couldn't wait any longer, he'd have to go to surgery because the infection was just too bad on his heart. So I signed the consents knowing, I'm signing for Riley. I couldn't sign him into rehab, but I can sign him to go to open heart surgery. And knowing that, the chances were slim with him being so sick going into surgery. And they took him first thing that morning. And I remember being in the pre-op and him just begging for ice chips because he was, so fever-ridden and thirsty and couldn't really give him anything, and just wetting his lips down and just telling him to be strong and he'd be okay and we'd see him soon. Well, 8.5, 9 hours later, with updates every 30 minutes to every hour. I worked at the same hospital, so they came out pretty frequently, the nurse did, to let me know how he was doing, and it just seemed like it was more bad news. One valve's bad, now the next valve's bad, and there's a infection eating away at the lining of his heart, so we need to repair that too, and knowing the longer he's under, the worse the chances are. But he made it out of surgery, and Dr. Steinberg is amazing. It's literally like an art, is what he did, was phenomenal. But he told us, what we're looking at, and just because he's out of surgery, things still weren't right. So he was in ICU for quite a while, and the next 24 to 48 hours, we would know, if there was any adverse effects from the surgery and whatnot. And slowly but surely, he started coming around and coming to. But oh man, the emotions and the fear, and I just don't ever want to relive that ever again.
What kind of took place that led him here, into treatment here?
I had suspected a while after he had been home that he had probably relapsed, but anytime I would confront Riley or ask him about it, it was just immediately shut down. I was crazy, for thinking those type of things, but I knew, a mom always knows, and I just couldn't, for the life of me, I didn't, like the doctor said, if you use, it's a death sentence. Anytime you make that decision to even use drugs, you're making that choice as well. But now you just have, this all the more behind you. So I did not want to put Riley out on the streets and say, just go, because I felt like if I did that, I would be signing his, death sentence too, in a way. But I just went back to that enabling. I felt if I'm giving him a place to keep coming home to, knowing he's using, I'm not helping him. And I'm not showing my other children, that I'm doing right by this as well, And my husband and I talked about it, and we said, if you want to keep using, you can't be here, and you have to, be an addict. You'll be out on the streets doing what addicts do to get what they need to get, for what they need, what their needs are for addicts. He left, and he took a lot of things with him that didn't belong to him, but he left. And 5 weeks later, he called and said, I can't live like this anymore. I'm done. We had previously came to Choices Recovery. We got so far as that if I go back to when I talked to you about, if I give in a little bit to Riley, he'll reciprocate and do this for me. Oh, buy me a new pair of shoes and I'll go to rehab. So what do? I take him to go get new shoes, and he'll go to rehab. We get in here and we don't get as far as the parking lot, and he takes off. And I'm driving home alone, and Riley's out, running. And this time, when he had called after being out on the streets for 5 weeks, he came here, and he's been here ever since. I remember the first time I talked to Riley, there was a difference in his voice, excuse me, sorry. A son I hadn't heard in a long, long time. You know, a happiness, a hope. You know, just telling me that he's at the right place and he's learned so much about himself, and the people here really care about him. And oh, my heart was just filled with happiness, and I was like, it's so good to hear, my son again, because for 4, nearly 5 years, I've just been hearing, my son addicted to drugs. And I couldn't even have a conversation with Riley. And here I'm talking 30 minutes on the phone call to him, while he's in rehab, telling me about his day and what he does and the people here and how hopeful he was. And every phone call, I'd get excited, like knowing, oh, he might call tonight, he might call tonight. And a couple of days would go by, and he'd call, and the conversation would get a little longer and a little longer. And then we get to come visit him, and he just looked so good, putting on weight and working out and having good relationships with the people here and other not just staff, but other clients here as well. So
what you've been going through, who have a child that has been through addiction, is going through addiction, the ups and downs, that you've been through. What advice would you give to parents who see this?
My advice to you would be to prepare for battle, because it's a battle. And sometimes you feel like you're the only one standing in that battlefield against everybody else, But you have to have hope and you have to have faith, and I call it my secret weapon. I pray and I pray and I pray. Even when I run out of words, I just beg God to listen to my heart. And even on your darkest, deepest, saddest days, and you just feel like you can't do it anymore, or things are too tough and you don't even want to get out of bed and face the day, you have to find something, no matter what it is, to live for. If it's your other children or just, the hope of a sober loved one, just keep on fighting.